pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to films I should have talked about years ago. And so, let's get it going on with something different right here. Basically put, if you were to take the sequel to Cloverfield from 2008, which at the time was known as 10th Clover Lane Avenue, pretty much, I already seem to forget a lot about it. And if you wanted to create a third film based on this one little natural phenomenon that occurred in more recent history in American audiences, especially when it comes to turn with the kaiju genre in films, then you basically get 2018's Cloverfield Paradox. Basically, this is just the third film in the Cloverfield series as it had eventually came to be, because in 2008, Cloverfield became a big success at the time. At least for 2008, it's probably the best that I've ever seen come out of American cinema at the time. And there was so much taught about this thing. I mean, it was one of the biggest conversation pieces I might have ever come across in my life. I could barely go a single second without hearing anything about Cloverfield left and right. Cloverfield, Cloverfield, Cloverfield. This second film itself, 10th Cloverfield Avenue, Lane, Street, something out there. I mean, this is just part of the whole thing about it. It's that forgettable at this point, because it must have been such a flop. But then, what do you think happens? Some franchises just keep on going. But, of course, we can't forget to mention the fact that with Psycho, for one thing, the second film happened to be quite a big thing out there. It was so loved that who even knew that apparently Psycho could go beyond just one film after 1960. But then, of course, with 3 other sequels that came by, they all actually did pretty well. Or at least that's how we look back on them these days. But for more recent years, we had the Cloverfield trilogy of films. And today, let's talk a bit about Cloverfield Paradox, which is almost nothing at all like what you've seen so far. But the big thing about Cloverfield Paradox in comparison to the other 2 films is that, well, the first film had quite a big, intense action set upon in the city of New York, in where a monster is apparently wreaking havoc all over the place. And by the end of the film, it's shown to have such a huge scale and power and such an impressive, intimidating appearance that went beyond anything we've ever seen before. But the biggest part about that film, at least to my knowledge, was the kind of camera work that had been used. It basically gave us a big setup, just to give us the feeling of what it would be like if we were actually through the eyes of civilians. Innocent people whom are getting attacked by this exact creature of ginormous scale. It really made us feel like we were actually down there, on the streets of New York, in the crossfires of the military, and eventually face to face with the eyes of the monster itself. Then the sequel came around, and even myself, I have no clear idea what exactly was supposed to be going on there. Was it supposed to continue the story of what the first film left off with the creature destroying New York? Or is it something different? Then here we got the third film, which thankfully a lot of the details are still fresh in my mind, mostly because I had already watched it once, last April. So it's been about 18 months now, nearly, since I watched that film, along with a few others, which I've already talked about pretty much. Well, anyways, Cloverfield Paradox basically just gives us a whole different idea here. It technically does happen to reboot the series as it is. It also gives us a new impression on what the actual Cloverfield monster looks like nowadays. But unfortunately, that's only at the very, very, very end of the film itself. Now, as disappointing as that sounds, I really have to admit, there are in fact a couple of other things that I'm more than just willing to talk about here. I'm more than willing to actually discuss a few unique prospects about this film. First of all, the majority of the plot actually takes place in space, on a large colony, with several different workers with several different nationalities. It's basically the mixture of United Nations, basically being brought up into the stars on a large space station. But this in particular, I can't necessarily be sure what that has to do with the Cloverfield monster entirely, but I had learned that it did have something to do with the integral plot that had been taking place, especially after the second film. So here, what we basically see is we have several different workers. One's German, one's Russian, one's English, one's Brazilian, one's American, and then of course you have a few others pretty much tossed into the mix. I myself am not necessarily familiar with the majority of these actors and these characters that they are supposed to utilize to the best of their abilities. Though I do like a couple of things about this sort of space exploration cliche that is being brought on into a Cloverfield sequel, especially with the fact that there's the classic Russian spy gag, pretty much, being blended in. It's that stereotype that keeps on giving and giving, letting us know that apparently Russian spies are still a thing, even here in the present when we've deduced a lot of facts. So, I really do like that they apparently had the decency to pretty much kill off the Russian character early in that film, when we pretty much are supposed to care for every one of these people on the ship, because it's almost reminiscent to that of what Alien brought us back in 1979, except this was nearly 40 years later. This was pretty much a time where we didn't have anything super groundbreaking, but yet somehow some films happen to succeed, especially when it earns at least $1 billion. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe is extremely overrated for what it is, and probably one of the most expensive things you could ever put together in an American cinema, ever in history. So, they make billions of dollars, all because people are suckered into seeing them, like myself. So stop seeing them. With Cloverfield Paradox, though, we do get ourselves a sense of the worry that tries to be as good as possible, but with the utilization of the classic space exploration sort of vibe that you can get from other franchises, usually more better, like Star Trek or Alien, or even the big medley of Star Wars franchises, all blended together into one big saga. Especially with the whole new trilogy that we got over the past few years. But anyways, with Cloverfield Paradox, it does seem that it does try to be as beneficial as possible with these new things implemented into it. But with all that we've already seen from other franchises, Cloverfield basically went from a giant monster attack on the city of New York to an almost unobscured sort of thing out there that we already forgot about overnight. And then, of course, we have a bit of a space exploration thing going on. 3 films, all blended into one unique little adventure. So, you got 3 different genres pretty much blended in all at once. I kind of wonder, though, if there's ever going to be a Cloverfield Part 4. But who even knows if that even happens? But again, let's just say that from the start to the finish, you might not really get every single detail captured within your mind. It's almost that of a miracle and a lot of luck that I somehow preserve a lot of the things that I saw last April, well over a year ago. I mean, it's just amazing knowing that I can somehow remember way too much that happened in 2020. Partly because, well, way too many good things happened here, whereas so many things that have happened in this year were bad. Beyond bad, even. So, I suppose that's just probably what I have to say about that part. But anyways, one final thing about the Cloverfield Paradox is that, well, you know what? I hate to say it, but the opening scene alone, with all that stuff that's taken place, and traffic jams that happens, and then of course with the explanations about why they needed to go to the stars, actually seemed more entertaining than everything else. Yeah, the beginning of the film pretty much gives us all the entertainment we need, and then the rest of it is pretty much just the sugarcoating that tries to be sweeter than usual, but instead gives us a bit of a sour lift to it. I don't necessarily know if you'd be able to put that together, but that's just how I pretty much felt the first time I watched it. And even if I watched it a second time, I can't really say that I might get to it as good as it used to be. But you know what? That's just kind of what it is. What you see is what you get. And with the third film in the Cloverfield series, it's pretty much what you'd expect to be. A bit of a shameless, average sequel that just exists for the fun of it. Because the writers and producers and all that good stuff are just looking forward to seeing what the future could bring anybody out there. In terms of giving this a score, I can't really say I should give it very high, but at the same time, because of the unique merits that I find within this thing, somehow being even better than that of things out there like Star Trek and Alien and all that good stuff out there relating to space exploration, all that good stuff relating to that classic genre of the same name, and all the cliches that are being brought back for a whole new generation of audiences worldwide. The score that I'm probably going to give this thing is maybe going to be no more than a 5.8 out of 10. So again, average, the third film in the series, and you know what they say about the third film? It's never as good, most of the time. Well, anyways, I will say that I myself am not really appalled by a lot of the new suggestions that I'm seeing by some of you, as well as a lot of new requests that I'm happening to be receiving from some people out there. Anybody who's willing to comment any kind of film idea out there, I might as well go ahead and take them. I'll go ahead and watch them on whatever platform I can get, but please, be reasonable. And be sure that it's a platform that I know I have access to. So, if you want to see more go down on my channel though, make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.